Well, these days, just getting back to modern day health,
Yep.
a lot of people these days are suffering depression
Mm-hmm.
and anxiety,
Yep.
and getting sleep apnea,
Mm-hmm.
getting masks put on.
Mm-hmm.
And every second person you know, especially men,
Yeah.
are on antidepressants.
Yeah.
Now you have a spiritual explanation for this as well, or is this to do with emotions and spirit influence? Or
Well, it depends what type of depression. If we look at the spirit influence that occurs, all spirit influence occurs because of an emotion in the beginning anyway. So everything can be traced back to a cause within the person's own soul, and if it's a child, then the cause is usually in the parent's own soul that is causing the physical responses. So if we go back to the cause within the soul, what we start to discover with depression, and most psychologists know this, is that a person who's depressed is generally very suppressed with rage. In other words, they have a lot of anger inside of them, which they don't feel capable of releasing, or they don't feel safe to release. And as a result of that, they suppress their anger. And once they suppress their anger, they go into a very numb state, a very detuned and numb state. Now, of course, when you go into a detuned emotional state, you are inviting lots of other external influences, including spirit influences. But if we forget that for a moment, the actual cause is the desire to suppress the emotion. And when we suppress all of our emotions, we get into depression. And when we are depressed, we are now living a life of suppressed emotion. In other words, all of our life is pretty much governed by how much emotion we are suppressing. Now that's classical depression. If you start looking at, say, something like manic depression, you have a cycle where you have a high, where the person is almost and can sometimes become psychotic in their nature, and then you have very, very extreme lows where the person becomes suicidal in their nature, and they seem to like the highs and they don't like the lows. Now, if you look at this cycle, there are often many spirits attached to the high-based cycle of the person in a high. So you have a person go off medication. They normally go into this high state where they are heavily influenced by spirits. The spirits cause them to stay awake, 23 hours out of 24 every day. The spirits individually connect to the person and get the person to do all these different things they would not normally do. The spirits feed this person with energy, so they have enough energy. I once knew one man who was manically depressed, and he was 65, and while he was in the high state, he could do handstands, like walk around on his hands. If you asked it to do it in his low state, he couldn't even move his body to get into a hand press position. So, on the high state, he could walk around on his hands, and that's an indication of how much energy he was being pumped full of through some kind of connection with the spirit world, with spirits. Then the spirits after a while the physical body cannot maintain that amount of energy. And so what happens is the spirit, the physical body, once it gets to a certain point, can no longer maintain the connection with the spirits. And at that point is the point when the person goes into a severe down. They go through what we would call normal life and into major depression, suicidal depression. And that's usually when they go to get some medication. The medication makes them stable, and then usually after they've been stable for a while, they go off the medication because they don't like its side effects, and then back up into the high cycle again, predictable as ever, generally. Now, that particular cycle, manic depression, I feel, is still caused by some underlying emotions in the soul of the individual that they are trying to avoid. They are trying to avoid certain things in their life this is where I feel this psychology can assist understanding what they're trying to avoid, and also their desire to have this high life, this life where they feel like they're full of energy and they feel like they're powerful and they feel like they're invincible. They want that, many of them, And many of those people who are medicated with antidepressants hate being medicated because it takes them away from that invincible feeling that they had when they were in their high. That high feeling is connected to spirits. The low feeling, they are being themselves, connected to some of their own emotions that they do not want to feel. They'd rather die than feel those emotions. What we need to do is teach people who are depressed how to feel their emotions in a loving way that's compassionate to them, that's not full of judgments, and many of these people will become well if we do that. But society as a whole expects equilibrium. We do not like to see a person crying, even a little, and we do not like people experiencing fear, even a little. And if a person is feeling crying fear, we call that out of sync with the normalcy. And then what we do is we judge that, and then we pump them full of a drug to get them back into normal life. None of them feel normal. You talk to every one of them, none of them feel normal. But the rest of us are happy because they appear normal. Because whenever they get into that crying, it reminds us of our tears. Whenever they get into their fear, it reminds us how afraid we are. And we don't like to be reminded of those things. And so we like everybody to maintain the status quo. So if we look at depression, suppression of rage and anger, and other emotions, because under rage and anger are the other emotions of fear and and sadness. If we look at manic depression, suppression of rage and anger, same emotion, and a willingness to die rather than feel, but also an addiction to being high, an addiction to being invincible, an addiction to feeling powerful, which is an avoidance of emotion of being powerless. Let's look at schizophrenia, another so-called mental illness. Schizophrenia, the person is plagued by voices. Now, the medical profession calls them voices that are constructed in their own mind through some kind of psychotic episode. I can't agree. They are voices from spirits who these people are open to speaking with, and these spirits come and torment them because they're able to. And if the person understood why there's the attraction, we could help them greatly. Often schizophrenia, particularly when it's young, has an onset from some kind of drug use. Sometimes it's marijuana, sometimes it's a mixture of other drugs, and it causes an onset of schizophrenia in some younger persons. This is because spirits are attracted to drug users. Spirits in the spirit world who would still like to have, get away from their own feelings and emotions, will attract people on earth who are trying to get away from their own feelings and emotions. So schizophrenia and hearing all of these voices, the voices telling them what to do, some of the things voices tell them are very, very damaging to their life, all caused by, firstly, the avoidance of an emotion, causing a desire or an openness to spirit communication. And there's nothing wrong with spirit communication. But when the spirits around you are telling you to kill yourself or to kill other people, now there's an issue, and we would need to address that. And if we were addressing the actual cause, we'd be having cures of schizophrenia. The reality is we're not addressing actual causes, and that's why we only have management of schizophrenia on the planet. We don't have cure.
So your solution is basically, let's feel our emotions, be open to our emotions, work through them, and that's the best answer to these health issues?
Not just that. Remember, I'm referring every emotion to the aspect of love. You see, just because you work through an emotion, let's say you've got an emotion of anger inside of you, you might feel the emotion of anger and express the emotion of anger inside of you, but in the end, the anger has an underlying cause that's a demand. Like it has some kind of demand that's inside of you that you feel you should get something and you haven't got it, and that's why you're angry, right? So there's an unlovingness inside of the person who gets angry. There's a cause for their anger. And what we need to do is take it back to the loving cause, or the unloving cause of all illness. It's always an unloving cause, but we need to get it back to love as well. So it's not just a matter of feeling the emotion. We have to understand emotion and truthful emotions based upon love compared to untruthful emotions that are based upon error, based upon fear, based upon rage or anger and other kinds of emotions like that. And we need to be able to feel both, but identify and get back to love as being the underlying healer. Now, once we understand that love heals everything, we will start to understand that any illness that's inside of myself is only caused by something that's out of harmony with love. And so I need to understand it's not just about emotion. It's about whether the emotion has a basis in love or not. If the emotion has a basis in love, it will always heal us. If the emotion has a basis that's out of harmony with love, it will always cause our disease, whether we feel the emotion or not. So we need to understand love as well as emotion. But to do that, we have to allow emotion. Obviously we need to allow emotion, but we also need to understand the difference between a love-based emotion and an emotion that's out of harmony with love as its underlying intention. Yeah. And that's where I feel the majority of people will come to grief with emotional work.
Yeah. Now, listening to